is very different from the America I have known and loved and grown up and been a part of and I'm proud to be a citizen of. An America that is welcoming to people from around the world, that is recognizing that all of us, most all of us, came from somewhere else and decided to make a life here, and some came voluntarily and some came involuntarily, and some came depending on difficult circumstances in the rest of the world. And that's still the way it is often in America. But the fact that people want to come to the United States of America and join us here and be part of our communities and build a life here and pick up their lives elsewhere, upend them to come here is the highest compliment anybody can pay to this country. And I honor those who choose to do that. And we welcome you here. I have always had excellent relations with the Islamic American community in Columbus, Ohio, both when I was Franklin County Treasurer and then when I held state office. We helped create the New Americans Council. I worked with the legislature on that when I was in state office. And I continue to feel today, as I've always felt, that we should be proud to have people who want to bring their talents and their abilities and their grit and their determination and join us in this country and be our fellow citizens. And I welcome those who do that.
Assalamu alaikum. And peace to all of my Muslim brothers and sisters and those of other faiths who are here for this important gathering. I had the privilege of serving in the United States Congress for 16 years. And during that time, I led the effort to stop profiling. After 9/11, our office became a place where the concerns of the Muslim community could be brought for the purposes of safety and security within our own communities, for the purposes of protecting local mosques, for the purposes of extending to the community the understanding that Muslims are an important part of our American experience. I gave over 500 speeches on the floor of the House of Representatives, warning against going to war, calling for an end to war, forcing votes to cut off funds for war. I initiated several lawsuits to try to stop wars, and also brought forth an impeachment resolution as an attempt to remove a president who unfortunately took us into wars based on lies. Every one of those wars involved Muslim countries. Every one of those wars we prosecuted unjustly. And I was often one of two people in the Congress who would raise my voice and dedicate myself to peace. On immigration matters, my staff was busy all the time trying to protect Muslim families from deportation. And I had 5 members of my staff over the course of my service who came from the Muslim community, including one young woman who was the highest ranking legislative director in the Congress. She happened to be a young Muslim woman, the only Muslim woman who was a legislative director. For all of these things, I was humbled to receive the national recognition from the Council of American Islamic Relations, an honor that I see as a challenge to continue to be of service, and I would like to be of service as your next governor. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Joe Schiavone. I'm a state senator from Youngstown. I first wanted to acknowledge the work that CAIR does every single day for people in this state, reaching out, representing people that need represented. As a workers' comp lawyer from the Mahoning Valley, I'm used to representing people that need represented because they have nowhere else to turn. And although it's not the same workers' comp and immigration law, it's the same kind of thing. You use your heart, you use your brain, and you protect people. And you stand up for people. And so, yeah, I probably haven't given as many floor speeches as Congressman Kucinich. But I will tell you that the passion that I have for people in this state will be unmatched. Because when I go down to the State House and I work on issues, you do it so that people have a voice. You know, I was never a part of government. I was never an elected official until I got appointed when I was 29 years old. And I went down to Columbus to start working on issues that were important to people. And I traveled around and I listened, and I've gone through the Muslim community, not just in this gubernatorial campaign, but as a state senator, because people feel left behind. They feel like they don't have a seat at the table. And as governor, people from the Muslim community, people from the Islamic community will have a seat at the table when we're talking about policy. We need to make sure that our young people, I have a 3- and a 5-year-old son. I want to make sure that my kids don't have to go through all of the issues that I see people going through every single day, so that they don't see the differences that many people see from older generations. We need to educate our kids to make sure that we recognize differences, because that's very important, and make sure that we're tolerant of one another. You know, my father and grandfather taught me to be respectful and to understand that just because people are different, it doesn't mean it's wrong. And so at the end of the day, that's what this is about, and I just appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you to answer questions.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Bill O'Neill. I'm the Democrat running for governor of Ohio. That's why we're all here. And I just got a memory lane look this morning. I realized that you have a large Somali community here in this room, and I want to say hello to you again. I was a travel nurse at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and I was amazed that they even had a Somali interpreter on staff. What an example of how, when a community opens its arms to immigrants, it works. And I'm proud to be in your presence. You know, since I'm running for governor, the first thing I have to do is show that I know how to make decisions. We all know that school funding is a big issue in Ohio. So the very first decision I made was when I nominated my running mate for lieutenant governor. Her name is Chantel Lewis, and she has, I kid her about it, she has more degrees than a thermometer. She has 2 master's degrees in education. She's working on her education doctorate. She has a superintendent's license. She's worked in Cleveland Public Schools and is now the principal of the highest performing elementary school in Lorain County, Ohio. I'm really proud to have Chantel Lewis as my running mate. But something about me. I'm an OU grad, Ohio University. I saw a thumbs up on that. That's sometimes helpful. I have a bachelor's from Ohio University. I have a nursing license from Huron Road School of Nursing, and obviously a law degree. You know, people ask me about the nursing license, and I say, well, the GI Bill put me through law school, and that was at 30. I became a nurse at 50, and now that I'm 70, I've got to decide what to do with the rest of my life. And that's why I'm at this table tonight. We've got a crisis in Ohio with opioids. We are losing 4,000 people a year. In simple math, 12 a day. We have 4,700 nonviolent marijuana criminals in jail today that are costing us $100 million a year. And we need, I'm going to say this very directly to you, we need to legalize marijuana in Ohio today, which will generate $500 million per year to open a world-class, and I say world-class, hospital network to treat the addicts like they are actually people worth worrying about and not criminals. My name is Bill O'Neill.
Thank you, candidate. We will begin the questioning now. The rules will be that I will ask the question, and then each candidate will have 9 seconds to respond to the question. Now, Ms. Ashraf is sitting here. She's our operations coordinator, and she has a card which will tell you when it's 30 seconds left, and she'll hold up and show you the card. We will begin with Mr. Codray, and then every time we have a new question, we'll go down the line. So the first question from Mr. Codray, and as I said, every question, we go down the line, and then for the next question, we start with the next person, and then each person gets to answer each question. Deaths from drug overdose continues to plague our country, and especially Ohio. The Center for Disease Control, CDC, ranked Ohio as the 2nd worst state in the country for drug overdose death rates in 2016. According to CDC, Ohio is experiencing an unprecedented loss of life. The new budget deal in Congress this week will provide for an additional $6 billion in funding to combat this crisis. over the next 2 years, but that is funding for the whole country. Most healthcare experts believe that this amount will be inadequate to solve this crisis. What type of resources do you believe that the state of Ohio needs to resolve the opioid crisis? And as governor, how will you ensure that those resources are available?
Okay, so the opioid crisis is something I think we all recognize is front and center in Ohio today. It's impossible to go around the state and not run into people, parents, siblings, friends who have been touched by this crisis, people with tears in their eyes. An elected official in Southern Ohio who told me about her son, who was a user and got into the criminal justice system on the thought that maybe that would help him straighten out. He was abused in the criminal justice system and the life spirals downward from there. That's happening over and over in Ohio. First of all, we need to recognize where to put responsibility for this. This crisis is blown up on the watch of the current Republican office holders who've held office for the last 8 years in Ohio and have done nothing significant to address this problem until now this year. Suddenly they have plans. In the 7th of their 8th year in office, they have plans because some of them want to run for other offices. Second, we have the president who says that this is an emergency but has been unwilling to put his money where his mouth is. And that is something that we can see. And the money that was just described will be wholly inadequate when you break it down. It's maybe less than $100 million for a state the size of Ohio. It will not make a dent. We need to continue to advocate for more funding from Congress on this issue. We need to be pushing very hard on that. We also need to recognize that the Medicaid expansion in the state is very much at risk. That is an expansion of health care that has provided bed space and treatment and opportunities for people to access health care across the state, including in our rural areas. And it is at risk because this legislature would like to do away with it. Governor Kasich is the only thing standing in the way right now, and none of the current candidates for governor on the Republican side has committed themselves to maintaining the Medicaid expansion. I am committed to maintaining the Medicaid expansion and to making the exchanges work for Ohioans' access to affordable care. There are law enforcement aspects of this problem. There are treatment aspects of this problem. If, in fact, the people of the state of Ohio do legalize marijuana at the ballot, which is where that issue will be fought, we will all implement that and use that funding to help with the opioid crisis. There are many pieces to this, but we have to recognize the tragedy this is. It is not just people winding up being warehoused in our jails and our prisons. That's bad enough. That's immoral, and the low-level nonviolent drug offenders should not be placed there. That's the wrong place for them. In addition, we need to recognize that people are unable to qualify for jobs. They're unable to pass drug tests. This is wrecking the state of Ohio. It's wrecking families in Ohio, and it needs to be addressed straight away.
Years ago, I was the author of a bill, H.R. 676, to create universal, single-payer, not-for-profit health care that would cover everything, including mental health care, including long-term care. It's long past the time that Ohio has an Ohio plan that would cover everyone in this state for basic health care, mental health, dental health, prescription drugs, and certainly when we have this challenge of addiction, we need to pool the resources of the state. Because the insurance companies aren't delivering. They turn people away after 4 to 6 weeks of treatment. Individuals have relapses. This is a time for leadership in Ohio, for public health leadership. And I intend in the next few weeks to present a plan to say how we're going to pay for such a program for accessible, affordable health care, which will include treatment for those who are addicted. Cleveland Veterans Hospital today has a program where they have a multidisciplinary program where they start to wean people away from these opioids. We need that kind of multidisciplinary approach, which involves psychologists and mental health specialists, because we're really talking about a mental health challenge. We have to, I believe we need to legalize marijuana so we can then make the transit to license it and use those funds to help fund our health care system instead of putting all this money in the criminal justice system to go after people who are really not, barely low-level offenders. We have to have a more enlightened approach towards health care. And that involves, and if we do that, we can meet the challenge of opioids. And we also have to start asking our doctors about their prescribing habits and get the state medical board more involved in providing protocols for MDs in the state and some guidance about prescribing. And finally, we need to create a culture where people are feeling supported and loved. Because there's something that's happened in America where people are moving towards more and more addiction. And part of it, I think, is our wars abroad that are bringing some of these substances back home. So I'm in tune to all of these various elements. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, as I traveled the state, almost every community said that they feel like they are the epicenter of the problem. And then you got to look at what the state has been doing. So Governor Kasich's drug program is called Let's Start Talking. Let's Start Talking is not working because we're not putting the resources in that's necessary in order to deal with the problem. You know, if you think about how this problem started, you had doctors that were overprescribing. You had workers' comp clients and people with injuries, sports injuries, that were taking drugs exactly like the doctor told them, and then they became addicted when the BWC cut them off. Or it's a kid at a party that made a decision to take a pill one day, but never intended to become a heroin addict, never intended to be taking fentanyl, something that can kill them in a second. But we've come to this situation, we have to deal with it. And so I'm the only candidate on this stage or off this stage that has proposed a plan to deal with the opioid problem in the state of Ohio. 6 months ago in the Ohio Senate, I proposed a bill that would allocate 10% of Ohio's rainy day fund, which there's $2 billion sitting in a checking account in Columbus. And I'm talking about 10%, $200 million to be spent 3 different ways. First, education for kids. Second, giving local governments the ability to man their police force. Giving local governments the ability to fund mental health. Giving local governments the ability to deal with addiction services. That's the way that we're going to make a dent on this. And then reconnecting families on the back end with job retraining. Making sure that we have the foster care system in a place where these kids can have somebody that cares about them when their parents are struggling so much. And I was just in Nelsonville 2 months ago. I went to a place called The Nest. The Nest is a place where kids can go before and after school because their parents are either dead or on heroin. That stuff will rip your heart out, but it's real. So we need as a state to invest in that, to give future generations an opportunity to overcome this problem. And until we put those resources in place, we can keep talking all we want, but we're not going to make an impression. We're not going to make an impact. We're not going to be able to help people the way that we need to.
You know, I served in Vietnam where I was awarded the Bronze Star, and in the Army I retired with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. And if there's one thing I learned from my military training, when you see a crisis, you have a choice to do. Lead, follow, or get out of the way. And when it comes to heroin overdoses, I'm a registered nurse who works in a pediatric emergency department. I have injected the method to save a child's life. I've seen their heart rate come back. I've seen their breathing start again. And then we send them home with their parents to die. Because there is nowhere to go in Ohio if you have an addiction crisis, even if you have insurance. So I am unequivocal in stating we have to open a statewide network of hospitals that provide long-term effective care for addicts. They are patients, they are not criminals. And you say, well, that's nice to see. But you know, when I started looking for money, I just started looking for the stupid things that the state of Ohio does. And one of them is, we have 4,700 people in prison today as we sit here in Dublin, Ohio, for nonviolent marijuana offenses. They're costing us $100 million a year to keep nonviolent people in prison. I say, let them go tomorrow and start treating people as patients, not as criminals. Where do I get the money for all of my dreams? It's easy. Legalize marijuana today. And the first thing that you will see is its medicinal qualities. In Colorado, they're seeing people are stopping using heroin and they're using marijuana, and the deaths are going down. But more importantly, I'm a greedy bureaucrat. If we legalize marijuana tomorrow, we make $500 million in sales taxes this year alone. With the $600 million I'm proposing, just getting rid of stupid rules, I'm telling you, we'll build a network of mental hospitals that will treat the addicts and will save lives. It is time to lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Next question. We start with Mr. Kucinich. All four of you are running as Democrats. Considering that Ohio Senate has only 9 out of 33, and the Ohio House has only 33 out of 99 House members, if you become the governor and the legislature is a Republican, how do you plan on enacting your agenda if the opposing party is in control of the legislature? Mr. Kucinich.
I don't think that a governor of Ohio can take a partisan approach to dealing with some of the big problems of the state. We know that there are Republican officials whose families are affected by drug abuse. We know that there are Republican officials who are having trouble making ends meet because of medical bills in their family. The Republican officials who are in districts where public schools are seeing their resources dwindle, principally because of votes that have been taken in the legislature. I intend to bring an entirely new approach that does not polarize, does not pit people against each other, but looks to find the commonalities that we have. And does that mean that people will necessarily agree? No. It means that you build relationships. This is how I did it in Congress. I may have disagreements with people, but I work to build relationships to see if there's something we can agree in of substance, and I was able to make some pretty significant changes, particularly in foreign policy, because of the coalitions I put together. Ohio must have a governor who will reach out to Republicans and try to convince them of a better path, who is not afraid to engage in the negotiating that needs to happen to be able to get to yes, and who has an understanding of the danger of polarized thinking. When you start to say it's us versus them, you set conditions that produce conflict. And I intend to bring the same approach towards peacemaking that I brought to the United States Congress and principles that I brought to the country, to this state, in order to try to find ways of unifying the people in the legislature so we can work together. Yes, I'm a Democrat, but I'm also someone who has the capacity to work with people on both sides of the aisle.
Mr. Bernie?
Yeah, as the minority leader in the Ohio Senate, I'm well aware that we only have 9 members, but thanks for reminding me. It's been a rough couple of years when you only have 9 against 24. But if you look at the things that I've proposed, if you've looked at the way that I've approached the Republican legislature, it's always work first and fight second. Currently, I have 2 bills that I've co-sponsored with Republicans, one regarding clean water across Lake Erie and down the Ohio River. That's not a partisan issue. We're talking about putting hundreds of millions of dollars into underground infrastructure so the future generations of Ohio have clean water. So I proposed that bill with Senator Gardner from Toledo. There's another bill that I've worked on regarding broadband expansion. Broadband expansion is not a Republican-Democrat issue, and it affects urban communities, it affects rural communities. So I reached out to all of the Republican senators in the Ohio Senate and got a Republican from Geauga County to co-sponsor because it's important to both of our areas. And so those are 2 examples of legislation that are currently pending today in the Senate. Now, you also heard me sit up here 5 minutes ago and bang on Governor Kasich for his drug policy. Because when you have to fight, you have to fight. And I will fight when I have to. But you always work first and fight second. And when you bring that thought process to the governor's office, then the legislators know that they want, that you are a person that will work with them. But if you got to hammer them and you got to veto things, make them come back and override it, that's part of the process. But when you try to go in with open eyes and listen, that's the way that you get things done because people are sick of the partisan politics.
I agree with Dennis. The governor's not going to change this situation. And for you non-politicians in the room, I hope you understand the stakes we're talking about. Ohio's always been roughly a 50-50 Democrat-Republican state, always has. They always call us a swing state. We have 4 seats in Congress right now because of the partisan pencil line drawing, and it's fundamentally wrong. What they're doing is fundamentally wrong, but why it really affects everybody in this room, if you become a Republican or a Democrat that has a safe seat, you don't have to listen to anyone. You don't have to care about the consequences of your vote and let the lobbyists reign. My plan is kind of simple. I like to think things simply. If we legalize marijuana in Ohio and we tell every state rep candidate in Ohio, get on this bandwagon because it's what the people want, we won't have to worry about balance next year.
Well, I actually think I had the first significant disagreement with each of the other candidates. I heard Dennis say we need to reach out and make peace with the General Assembly. I heard Joe say we work first, we fight only as a last resort. And I heard Bill say that the governor can't change this. I fundamentally disagree. The governor can and must change this. And we change it first by letting them know first where we will fight and where we will stand on principle, democratic principles, and we will not take their opposition lying down. I will also say I was in Washington, D.C., working there for the last 6 years. If any of you ever saw me being grilled by the Republicans in the House of Representatives, the most gerrymandered body in the history of the world, that was a partisan, polarized body, and in order to get anywhere, we had to take them on and fight with them. I will do that as your governor, and we will need to do that if we're going to make progress in this state. I saw how entrenched the opposition was to President Obama. You remember Senator McConnell, what he said. We are going to make him a one-term president. We will oppose all of his plans. That's the nature of politics today. And we have to recognize that and be willing to stand firm as a first resort, not as a last resort. We can't just simply go out there and think we're going to make peace with the General Assembly. There are things we can find common ground on, but we're going to have to stand up to them, we're going to have to take them on, we're going to have to fight them, or we're going to have to stand on principle. And I will do that as your governor.
For the next question, we begin with Mr. Schiavone. The question is, considering Ohio still has over 500,000 people with no health insurance, and that small businesses continue to see an increase in the health insurance premium rates, including CAIR-Ohio, what is your plan to provide health coverage to the uninsured and lower the cost of premiums, especially considering the uncertain future of the Affordable Care Act?
This issue is probably the most complex issue that can be talked about at the State House. You know, we've tried to go about, and you have to give credit to Governor Kasich for expanding Medicaid. But when you expand Medicaid, it's very, very costly. And if the federal government is not going to continue to fund Medicaid expansion, then whoever's the governor, whether it's somebody sitting on this stage or somebody from the other party, is going to have some tough, tough decisions to make because it's a ton of money. Billions and billions of dollars. So as a governor, I will continue to work on Medicaid expansion as long as those federal dollars come in. If those federal dollars do not come in, you have to make some tough decision of where you're going to go. And I think you go to the most vulnerable and you work upwards. The other problem with Medicaid expansion is that just because you give somebody a card that says they have Medicaid, it doesn't mean anything. Because I have so many people that call my office every single day that say, well, I'm Medicaid eligible, but my dentist won't take me. I'm Medicaid eligible, but I can't get physical therapy after a surgery. I'm Medicaid eligible, but there's only a couple of primary care docs in my area that take Medicaid. So be aware that, although I'm giving Governor Kasich some credit for expanding, if you don't set the reimbursement rates at a high enough level where people are actually going to take the patients, then it's not worth anything other than the value of that piece of paper. So you got to go back and you got to look at Medicaid expansion in a meaningful way where we're moving people from point A to point B, but understand the cost of this and understand that anybody that promises you that they're going to continue Medicaid expansion without federal dollars is going to have to find a hell of a lot of money. and it's going to be difficult. So as governor, I would continue to expand Medicaid. I would work with the reimbursement rates and make sure that the feds continue to buy into these state programs. Thank you very much.
So, Neil.
You know, it's interesting being here as a nurse because, you know, when people come in, I was at the Cleveland Clinic for 12 years. When somebody comes in and they get registered at the emergency department, nobody asks them whether or not they have insurance if they're bleeding. They said, come on in, it's federal law. That's very good. Unfortunately, the doctors have to be paid, and at the risk of sounding rude, and I see by a show of hands, who in this room has health insurance? Anybody? Okay. Well, on behalf of all the uninsured, I want to thank you for paying their bill, because that's what you're doing in the system we have in America. Now, the reality is, Governor Kasich, you know, he and I don't agree on a lot of things, but there are things we agree on. It was courageous for him to say expand Medicaid. I say as a governor candidate, keep it coming on. Keep bringing it on, because some insurance is better than no insurance. And the problem is, if there's anybody in America that doesn't have a health care card, they delay treatment. They just don't go to the hospital, and then they show up terminally ill. So this is probably the most important thing government can do. Unfortunately, it really is a federal issue. You know, I'm a long-term supporter of universal care for everybody. If we could get all these bureaucratic insurance papers out of the way, we're already paying for coverage for everybody, but we got a 30% surcharge for the insurance company. So universal health care for all. As the governor of Ohio, I'll go see my 49 friends at some convention and say, let's go gang up on Congress. Universal health care is the only answer that matters.
So we absolutely need to keep the Medicaid expansion in Ohio. And by the way, again, the Republican candidates for governor will not commit to keeping it. Mary Taylor is against it. Mike DeWine will not say what his position is on that issue. He continues to dance around it. We have to have the Medicaid expansion in the state. I've talked to doctors, and they've talked about how important that is because it gives people access to the healthcare system. If people don't have access to the healthcare system, then they're in the emergency rooms as a primary form of care, which, as Bill said, is inordinately expensive, and it's reactive, and they're not getting preventive care, and we're not minimizing the cost to them and to our society. But another point is the exchanges. Okay, the exchanges have not been working well in Ohio. We had at least 4 counties last year that were going to have no provider on their exchanges until the very last minute, and they finally limped in with a single provider on those exchanges. Other states are doing a better job with the exchanges. Kentucky, under their prior governor, did a very good job with their exchanges. The state of Washington has done a better job with their exchanges. We can do a better job with our exchanges if we look around the country and follow and adopt some of those practices. That's all part and parcel of this. The Republicans have demonized Obamacare. They made that a political issue from the beginning, not caring about the effect on human beings, not caring about the effect on our society, of trying to get more people into the healthcare system and get them covered, and they're still doing that. They had 8 years to find a replacement for Obamacare, and did they find one? Have you seen any replacement that they've come up with for Obamacare that works? They haven't. All they're doing is working to destroy. We need to have a governor who will work with other governors, red state and blue state governors, to push on that Congress to make sure they do not destroy the progress we have made. And when we can make more progress, we should do so. And we should get to a universal health care system in this country. We won't get there immediately, but that should be the goal. Most of the Western world has such a system. We can do that in the United States. In the meantime, we have to keep moving forward with implementing the Affordable Care Act rather than backward. And we need to push the Congress hard on this to make them responsible to people in this country, not to their own bare ideology.
So the next question will begin with Mr. O'Neill. The question is... sorry. Okay, extra time.
I want to acknowledge that Richard stood up for me. Thank you very much. How many people in the audience know how Canada was able to get a national health care plan. It happened when Ontario led the way, one of the provinces. Now, this state isn't just looking for a governor, it's looking for a leader. And I'm willing to lead the way to a state plan that will provide for universal standards of care and affordability and accessibility. We can do this in Ohio. There is no reason in a state of 8 million people with such incredible resources that we can't pool those resources and challenge the people to unite in defense of their own concerns. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican, your premiums and co-pays, if you have insurance, are putting you right to the wall. The amount of money that each person in this room dedicates to health care is a significant part of a budget. And people have to make decisions in families as to whether or not you're going to be able to afford clothing or a car or whatever based on the money you're paying for health care. We need to have affordability in this state. We need to have accessibility in this state. We have to stop closing hospitals in this state. We have to give people access to health care. The state has so many resources, and the incremental approach that we've been taking has only enabled the insurance companies to make more money. Remember this, insurance companies make money not providing health care. And we need a governor who is not tied to any of these interests, who's ready to challenge the insurance companies, unite the state, use the resources to protect the health of our people, and I intend to do that. Thank you.
I hope I didn't leave off the Mr. O'Neill now, finally. All right, so the question is, ever since the Unite the Right rally in August of last year, the discussion around hate groups and hate speech has increased. Ohio was plunged into the spotlight following the arrest of a resident of Toledo for the death of counter-protester Heather Heyer. Since then, prominent alt-right personality Richard Spencer has tried to rent space at public universities in Ohio. We have seen an increase in hate speech against Muslims and other minorities. Now, keeping in mind that hate speech is constitutionally protected in this country, what role, if any, do you believe should be played by Ohio's next governor in tackling the issue of hate speech, and will you take any specific steps as governor to address this issue? Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you. I had the privilege to work for the Attorney General's office back in the 80s in the Civil Rights Division, and we're always faced with, the rights of the individual versus the protection of the society. When you talk about hate speech, I think you have to look at the consequences of the hate speech. Everybody says that it's a freedom of speech and I can say whatever I want, but anybody that ever went to law school says, well, you can't yell fire in a movie theater because that's prohibited. When we have hate speech, and we've been seeing it, unfortunately, increasing dramatically with the internet, because it used to be just speech, and then maybe you put a letter. Now, when you say something hateful, you are harming someone. You are harming their reputation, and you're harming who they are. And as a nurse, I'll even say you're harming them physically and mentally. So no, I think a governor has an obligation to set the tone for what kind of a government and what kind of society we will live in. I say to you that the Attorney General, and that will be Steve Dettelbach, by the way, I say that the Attorney General of Ohio needs to get together with the legislature and draft legislation that while protecting free speech, makes hate speech a crime, punishable by prison.
Words matter. We need to understand that. Whether they're hate speech or Facebook posts, words matter. And when I was the Solicitor General of this state, the Ku Klux Klan was coming into central and southern Ohio and working to recruit. They were trying to gear up in the state. And we fought them and beat them back and drove them back out of Ohio, working with the Anti-Defamation League in the early 1990s. I also successfully worked to defend Ohio's hate crimes law in front of the Ohio Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court have a long history on these issues. The leader of the state, the governor of the state, needs to take a strong stand for diversity and inclusion and tolerance in our communities. Hate speech of all kinds should be understood to be un-Ohioan and un-American, whether it's directed against the Muslim community or whether it's directed against any other community in our society. And by the way, we're seeing that kind of speech from the President of the United States. So we're at a critical juncture in this country. We saw how he responded to Charlottesville, and it was disgraceful. And that is the tone that's being set. And we need leaders around the country, and governors can lead on these issues to say, we're going to set a different tone in our state. We're going to be welcoming and inclusive. And by the way, it is now good economic business in the state of Ohio to be tolerant and inclusive and to be a place that our young people want to stay, and other young people who come here to go to school want to remain, and businesses want to bring their business here because that's the kind of community they want to do business in. We saw the Chamber of Commerce last week supporting the non-discrimination against LGBTQ in housing and in the employment. I strongly back that measure, and there are more and more people recognizing that that is not only right, but it also works. And that's the policy that we should be leading with in the state, and the governor can set that example, and I will be proud to set that example for each of you.
The governor can certainly set a tone, and I will. My life is guided by some principles of the Christian faith that are similar to principles in Islam and Judaism. Through the prayer of St. Francis, which begins, "Make me a channel of your peace." And if we're guided by the spiritual principles that support that expression, we realize that every moment is an opportunity to create peace. We can create all the laws that we want. There are 10 commandments that deal with how we treat our brothers and sisters. But the truth of the matter is that each one of us, in the position that we hold, has a channel has an opportunity to be transformative in the approach that we take. When I was a member of Congress, I proposed what was called a cabinet-level Department of Peace to deal with the issues of violence in our society: domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, violence in the schools, gang violence, gun violence, racial violence, religious intolerance, violence against gays, police-community clashes. We need an organized approach in our society and in our state to dealing with the challenges of hate, of negative expression, and of empowering children to learn that they have the capacity to move beyond the challenges of the moment. As governor, I intend to help this state take a dramatically different, transformative approach to the science of human relations. Thank you very much.
You have to talk the talk and you have to walk the walk. You know, and as a leader, whatever kind of leader you want to be, you have to set the tone. And as governor, I'll be doing the same exact things that I've done as state senator. You know, I've gone to many pride events, brought my kids to pride events because I want them to understand that we're all human beings and that we all are supposed to live on this earth together. I brought my wife to Dreamers events. I bring friends and family we went to Somali Mosque and talked to the elders in the community about issues that were important to them. Bringing people's differences together, you realize that people aren't so different at all. All we want is the best thing for our kids. All we want is the best thing for our future. All we want is future generations to be in better positions than we are today. That's how you walk the walk. When you talk about laws, I think we need to sync our state laws with our federal laws so that we can deal with a lot of these hate crimes online. I think that that's an important thing that we can do. I've just proposed a couple of pieces of legislation, one about cyberbullying in schools so we can make sure we deal with this problem early. There's another piece of legislation that I put forward about sending images to people, whether it's hate crime, whether it's to shame that person, whatever it might be. You sync it with the federal law so that when people do this stuff, they're held accountable for it. So if you have a leader that is talking about positive stuff and acting positive and showing that and then syncing that with legislation that matches, that's what a true leader does, and that's what I was doing as governor.
Thank you. We're going to
to do now is that we had solicited questions online from people who attended the event today. We got a lot of questions. We got dozens of questions. So we have chosen a few questions out of the online questions. And then once I ask those, we'll have Jennifer ask questions from people who were in the audience today and who have filled out the index card with questions. So we'll begin with the online questions, and we'll begin with Mr. Codray. The question is, and the question comes from Kathleen and Doug, how would you emphasize leadership in reducing the number of deaths of unarmed civilians in police stops, particularly persons of color?
I think the first thing we need is to continue more transparency around the nature of this problem. I don't think any of us doubts that there has been abuse of suspects going on as long as there has been law enforcement and individual citizens. It's just that we didn't always know about it. We now have body cameras, we have dashboard cameras, we are actually seeing confrontations, and many of them, when you watch them unfold, do not make sense to an average person, don't make sense to me as to what's happening and why. You saw one the other night with that sheriff directing his deputies to take that guy out because they were damaging his cars. Take a human life because they were damaging his vehicles. That felt like poor judgment to me. And when we're transparent, we can hold people accountable. I will also say that law enforcement officers have a difficult job. We saw that yesterday in this community, in Westerville. 2 officers were called to a scene of domestic violence. You never know what's going to happen when you walk up to that door. They were shot. One was killed immediately. One died later at the hospital. It is a very difficult job. We need better training. We need more transparency. We need the kind of body cameras, the things that are now technologically feasible where we can hold people accountable. People need to be disciplined if they turn off those cameras. There's no good reason for them to do that except they don't want something to be seen. But at the same time, these are difficult situations, and our law enforcement has to continue to understand and appreciate and be trained and deal with some of the most delicate situations we deal with in our society. But we also need to make sure that we are not engaging in profiling, which is sometimes the easy answer, and we all know that that's gone on over the years, and it needs to stop.
The governor's office is a very powerful office, and not everyone's aware of the extent of the governor's power. When we're looking at the abuse of authority, whether it's on the streets, through the use of deadly force, or the prosecutorial approach that doesn't really render justice, the governor of the state can actually do something about it, and here's how. Let's say that a prosecutor fails to follow the logic of events that could lead to someone being charged for misconduct in the use of deadly force. Well, actually, under the Ohio Constitution and under the Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 3, point 07 and 08, the governor has the ability to be able to essentially prefer charges, sign a document that would cause a judicial review of the conduct of a county prosecutor or any other official. And that could result in either a judicial trial or a trial by jury. Now, that's just one area where I'm willing to use the power of the governor's office to make sure that the use of deadly force is not going to be a practice. Number 2, police need to be appreciated. There's no question about that. And we need to understand they put their lives on the line every day. Police need to be better trained, and they need to be better paid. They need better education. They need educational benefits. We can't make this about police versus the community. We are all in this together, and if we take a unified approach, bringing the interests of the community and fair law enforcement together with the interests of the responsibilities of law enforcement officers, I think that we can find a path that can dramatically reduce the misuse of deadly force, and that needs to be the direction we go in. Thank you.
I mean, let's start with the premise that most police officers are good, and most residents are good. And so we need to figure out how to incentivize that relationship even further. And when you cut local government funds, then the local governments cut their police training. They cut their mental health screenings. They cut all of the things that are necessary in order to continue to grow this relationship. And so it's a good thing to have bias training for police officers so that they can go through this and they can work through issues. It's very important to have mental health screenings, not just for the police officers, for residents that desperately need it. Then you can nip these things at the bud so that you don't have as many situations occurring. If you look at what other states have done in other cities, a lot of cities incentivize the police, fire, and teachers living in the communities where they represent. And that way, your neighbor is your police officer, so you guys can actually hang out and cook out on your day off and enjoy one another's company and understand that you are the same people and you're not so far apart. That's incredibly important to this relationship and growing this. I think it's also really important, to answer your question directly, is that we have an accountable and transparent system when this does happen, so that everybody has to go through the same process, whether you're a police officer or you're the accused. And so that you can go through and people understand that it is a fair system no matter who it is. And that way you set parameters, people understand what direction they're going to be going when they're going through the criminal justice system. And as governor, I would lead through all of those issues.
I want to thank the organization for the question, because it's a question that needs to be discussed publicly more often. Every day I start my day on my knees in prayer, in gratitude for what I have, but this morning I had to pray for those 2 Westerville officers who died. 2 officers died within 24 hours, protecting all of us, and we owe them an immense debt of gratitude. But that's not where the analysis ends. Sure, police officers have very dangerous jobs. There's 350 O'Neills up in the Cleveland area, many of them cops and firefighters. I understand what they go through, but there is a balancing test that has to be done, and that's between the danger of the police officer's job and the rights of individuals to be left alone and treated fairly by the police department. I think I come here uniquely situated with that. I have 10 years as a Court of Appeals judge and 5 years as a Supreme Court justice. I would say half my docket had to do with interactions between police and citizens. Did they or did they not follow the rules? But the reality is, this is going to be, again, setting the tone of what kind of state we want to live in. And I heard a suggestion of mental health screening. I will up that. Legalize marijuana. Open the mental health hospital network we used to have, and police officers will have somewhere to go when they get stressed out. Right now, there's nowhere for them to go. And let me just add to that. Once upon a time, we had a mental health network in Ohio, and we closed every single one of those hospitals. And the theory was if we send them back to 88 counties, they'll magically get treated somewhere. And it didn't happen, and they ended up in jail.
Thank you.
We'll begin with Mr. Kucinich with the next question. This is a very popular online question we got from a lot of people. So the question is, do you support the full legalization of recreational marijuana in Ohio?
Yes. Why is this so difficult? Really? I mean, look, I grew up in an era watching this movie, Reefer Madness, okay? I don't know how many of you have ever seen that. Probably most of the older people in the audience. But here's the point. We need to take an enlightened approach. How many of you have gone to a rock concert and the air had this peculiar scent? I mean, really, or a sports event. I mean, let's face it, it's already being used. The question is, why doesn't the government make it legal and tax it? And find a means of using those funds to go back to helping support health programs. So, yes, I'm in favor of legalization. I don't think it should be a closed question. I don't think we should leave it to, that a governor should just say, well, we'll see whatever the voters do. People are looking for leadership. And people want to know what I would do. I would be happy to lead the way. Do I think it's the most important issue? No. But do I think that it points the way to a more free type society? You know, I've got a little bit of libertarian theory in that says government shouldn't be in everything about people's lives. If they want to smoke pot, by the way, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I've never done drugs, and you know what, I'm a happy person for it. But if other people find other paths to happiness, if they drink, if they want to smoke marijuana, that's up to them. I'm not, you know, nobody died and left me the prosecutor. I want to make sure that we have a state that feels more free, and that we have more resources, and that we move on from this debate. Thank you.
Yeah, in the State House, you don't get to vote maybe. So if I'm asked yes or no, I would vote yes. But I will tell you that there are many legislators in the state that are going to vote no. And in the current situation that we're sitting in, I think moving in the medicinal first was the right way to go about this. Then you start showing people that you can give oil from a plant to a kid that has 100 seizures a day rather than 20 different pills in order to alleviate a symptom. And then you can start showing people that this is a worthwhile process. People will be working. People are still following the law. Nobody's going to have huge bags of weed on the street, people smoking out there. Like, we're going to have non-smoking medicinal marijuana for certain kinds of medical conditions. And I think that that's the right way to start. Now, I will say that if we start going into this recreational conversation, the only way that I would vote for recreational marijuana is if there was a dedicated funding stream that I could actually see that's making a difference. I've heard so many times from a lot of older Ohioans that, the same lottery thing happened where everybody talked about the lottery and we moved towards making the lottery legal and the money was supposed to go to the kids in schools, but unfortunately, when they gave the money to the kids, they pulled it out from 20 different ways, so it's a wash. You got to make sure that you have a dedicated funding stream that you can actually see the impact, whether it's education, economic development, rebuilding communities, something that is tangible. So I would vote yes in that certain situation, but I think it's going to be a slow, long process for those that think this is going to happen quickly. The only way that it would happen quickly is if it was a citizens' initiative on the ballot.
I don't think anyone in this room is going to be surprised by my answer. Yes. As I told you earlier, I've had a wonderful career as a Supreme Court Justice. I've had a wonderful career as a judge. I've been an Assistant Attorney General. I was on my way to retirement when I looked at what I consider to be what's terribly wrong in Ohio. And I started with the process of when 4,000 people are dying every year, and we're doing nothing about it. And then I got to the analysis. Did anybody ever think about the fact that beer and wine and tobacco are legal products in Ohio? And we tax them and we make a lot of money and people get to make their choices. But if you use marijuana in Ohio, we put you in the back of a police car and we spend $20,000 a year to keep you in jail. That makes no sense whatsoever. But there's more compelling answers here. Marijuana has medicinal qualities that we can't get in Ohio today. Everybody's so proud of the legislature legalizing marijuana a year ago. A doctor cannot administer marijuana in today because the legislature and the Department of Commerce and the governor are putting the monkey in the works. I don't know what they're doing, but I know they're not getting the kids out of seizures right now. We need to legalize marijuana. You elect Bill O'Neill, it will happen.
I agree with the sense of a lot of what Bill said, although I will say that for him to simply say you elect Bill O'Neill, it will happen is wishful thinking. This legislature, as Joe pointed out, is not going to pass legalizing recreational marijuana. It will have to go to the ballot. That'll be true for all of us. If this is going to happen, it's going to have to be on the ballot. It was on the ballot several years ago, and it was voted down, although that was a very flawed proposal. It was a monopolistic proposal, as you'll remember. What we should have is a straight up or down vote on the legalization of marijuana in this state, and if the voters elect to do that, then we will implement it, and we will implement it well. Let me also say that I thought both Joe and Bill pointed out that the medicinal marijuana has been legalized ostensibly in the state, but it has been implemented poorly to the point where it hasn't even happened yet. It's being slow-walked in the state government, and they've now introduced a process that was deeply flawed. You had a felon choosing as part of the selection process who would get the ability to produce medicinal marijuana in the state. That needs to be completely redone, but then it also needs to be put on a fast track. We need medicinal marijuana, which has been legalized in the state, to be implemented so we can see how it works, we can work out the kinks. It shouldn't take years to get there. That is very common across the country now. Recreational marijuana is still somewhat uncommon across the country. There are various problems being worked out in Colorado, I'm aware of, but we should put it on the ballot here, let the people vote up and down on it, and nobody here has any other mechanism for getting it done than that.
Thank you. So Jennifer has been collecting questions from the audience. She has selected a few. She'll be asking them now. Please try to be brave. We want to squeeze in 2 more questions maybe before closing the remarks.
Okay, so the first question is an environmental question, and this is from Kathy Cohen-Becker. We know that climate change exacerbates wars and refugee crises. We know that fracking leads to a lot of methane, which is 83 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Science is telling us that we must be to zero emissions by 2050 if we hope to have an inhabitable planet. What specifically will you do as governor to put Ohio on the path to 100% renewable energy by 2050 or before? And we will start with Mr. Chabon.
So if everybody saw what has happened in the House and the Senate over the past 2 years, we had a step-by-step program that was being implemented in order to get to the position that the moderator just brought forward. The General Assembly 2 years ago voted to freeze that. And I made the argument on the Senate floor that unfortunately when you see these freezes, you can't thaw them out. Because then the next step is you do another bill that sets a subcommittee to study the freeze and then another committee to study the subcommittee's decision, and you just keep going round and round and round. And so we need to make sure that we put that STEP program back in place. That way we can retrain our workforce in order to be skilled in alternative energy sources. And we can rebuild our state, clean up the lake, clean up the river, make sure that we are a state that is welcoming to this industry so that when people are looking to move to Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, or Pennsylvania, they pick Ohio. And then we can put our people to work so that young people have opportunities here in the alternative energy industry. If we don't start back by thawing out that freeze and putting that STEP program back in, then when I talk to people that come into my office from this industry, they say, we're not coming to Ohio because you guys don't want us. And your legislation reflects that. And so until we make that move, we can't get our footing here. And so that would be the first piece that I would move, is moving through the General Assembly in order to get that back in position. Thank you very much.
I think why I'm such a simple guy is because of my training. Again, I say Army officers look at lead, follow, or get out of the way. But a nurse says assess what's the problem, come up with a plan, and then implement it and evaluate it. Hopefully everybody in this room has seen the postcard that I have, the O'Neill for Governor piece. Look on the back of it. It's not just mine and Chantel's pretty face. We have an 8-point plan that we have committed to at the beginning of the campaign. And if you look at my brochure, some of the stuff is so simple I can't figure out why we're not doing it today. Why are there not government paid for solar panels on top of every government building in Ohio? We could make them in Ohio. That would create jobs for design, creation, installation. They pay for themselves in 7 years. There is no reason for any government building in Ohio not to have solar panels on top of it. While I'm on that, why wouldn't we give tax breaks to citizens like we did 10 years ago? You put solar panels on top of your house, you prove that they are made in Ohio, and we'll give you a tax break. There's no reason. They pay for themselves in 7 years. And then where I'm really getting a lot of feedback, why isn't there a 200-mile-an-hour high-speed train from Cleveland to Columbus to Cincinnati, which the feasibility study said to do 20 years ago? It's energy friendly. It is a big job builder. It's a way for us to say this is a good place to bring your business. Solar, and then you want me to start talking about wind farms in Bowling Green? Why aren't we encouraging that as a state? They pay for themselves. Let's do it. We have the technology in Ohio. We have the workforce. We just aren't doing it.
I agree 100% with what Joe said on the subject. We were moving in the right direction under Governor Strickland. We put in place renewable energy standards, and there was progress, and it was measurable progress that could be made each year going forward. I have no idea in the world why this legislature, which is so backward-looking on so many issues, has decided to stop that in its tracks here, and that they are just dead wrong on this subject. They are fighting the future. They're fighting the future of the state. They're fighting the future of this country. They're fighting the future of the globe. And it is all about this ideology about denying climate change, which is an article of faith for the political base, and it's red meat for the political base. And it is out of step with modern science, and it's out of step with the rational Western world. We should be pushing for renewable energy in the state as a matter of reducing the cost of energy. And by the way, we should also be retrofitting more energy efficient mechanisms into homes and businesses in the state. We should be incentivizing that, and we've started in that direction as well. We're working toward one of the largest solar fields in southern Ohio. We should be embracing that and supporting it. We have some wind farms in northwest Ohio. We could have many more, except for this stupid setback siting law that Bill Sykes got into the code, which is not well thought out and is being opposed by many Republicans as well, and it is simply getting in the way of Ohio leading the way in the future. Let me say one more thing, which is that when President Trump put the United States on the wrong side of the climate debate with the Paris Accord, that does not speak for most Americans. And there are a number of governors in states, such as Governor Brown in California, and it will be true of Governor Cordray in Ohio, which will say, we are a sovereign state of the United States of America. We continue to believe in and agree with the need to stop climate change and to slow it down. And we will do that with renewable energy by pushing forward on that front and in other fronts as well. We can make that decision as a state, and that's a way we can help lead the world.
You're going to be not just electing a governor. Hopefully you'll be electing a leader who has the ability to bring a different kind of thinking to the office. Totally different policies. The essence of the question that was asked was an environmental question. As governor, I intend to end the practice of fracking and of decompression wells, which is poisoning our fresh water supply, which is poisoning surface water and groundwater. And you can do that through denying permits, through the ODNR. As governor, I intend to rely on the work that I did in Congress, where I led the way, unsuccessfully I might add, but proposed limits on the concentration of atmospheric carbon. I was part of the program for 360 parts per million. Now, what we need to do, we need to figure out what can we do about global climate change. Can you do anything about it? Everyone talks about the weather, no one does anything about it, right? Let me tell you what we can do here in Ohio. We can take a regenerative approach to agriculture, help our farmers stop being the captive of these chemical companies, where agricultural runoff is poisoning our lakes, our streams. We can help farmers improve soil nutrient. And when they do that, they'll be able to draw more carbon down from the environment. And when they sequester the carbon, you can actually measure that. You can monetize it. You can help incentivize farmers to change their farming and make Ohio not just number one in moving towards climate change amelioration, but also in agriculture. So I'm thinking of ways to deal with this that are dramatically different than anyone else who would run for governor, and I am ready to lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Laura. She didn't give the last name. In the current climate of the Me Too movement, it seems more important than ever to elect more women to political office. If you are elected governor, what will you do to hire and promote women in your administration? And what will you do to push for legislation protecting women's rights, including better protections for victims of sexual abuse and harassment? And we will start with Mr. O'Neill.
Let's start with equality and balance and numbers. As I said, I was a lawyer for the Civil Rights Commission for the Attorney General's office. Little known fact you folks may not know. Rich Cordray and I were in the same office. He was just at a much higher level. Now, what is important to know is when we talk about leadership, I told you in the beginning of this session, my very first executive decision was, how do we balance the team? And I sent out a team around the state of Ohio, and I said, find me a running mate. Find me a running mate that is a female in education, because I figured that was the two things to start with that we really needed. And I ended up with, as I told you, a person, Chantel Lewis, with more degrees than a thermometer and ready to lead in education. And I think that's an important thing. But I think that the basic balance dictates from a civil rights standpoint that the workforce needs to be 50%. There's just no question. That should be a goal, it should be an objective, and it's easily reachable, because it is insulting to me to look at organizations that are simply educated males and they have, equally educated females doing lower level jobs. So I think it's, once again, we're talking about the governor of Ohio. You set the tone. You say in all agencies, it should be 50% men, 50% women.
We should be grateful to the Me Too movement for the change that it's affecting in American society. And it has to do with what is being said and done all the time to women, whether it's in Facebook posts or whether it's in the workplace. And the treatment of women has historically and consistently been excused, and it's wrong. And women should not have to put up with physical harassment or verbal harassment in the workplace. They shouldn't have to worry about whether they have to have the courage to come forward. That should be able to be done safely and routinely. And they should not have to worry about how to handle those situations that are thrust upon them through no choice of their own, no fault of their own. And I will say something about the Me Too movement. It will change America. But it will change America when men change other men. And men will have to step forward here and say, we're not going to tolerate other men doing this. And we're going to speak up as well, and we're going to root this out. I'm proud to have, my running mate is Betty Sutton, former congresswoman from Barberton. She is one of the strongest public officials that the state of Ohio has ever produced. And she is my partner in this effort. And before I got in this race, she put out a sexual harassment policy to govern how these things will be handled in state government, and also as an example that will be set for the private sector in the state of Ohio as well, and will be insisted upon for the private sector who wishes to contract with the state government, which is a lot of them. It is a strong policy. I have embraced it fully. It is the Cordray Sutton approach to these issues. But I will say to you that men have to change other men if we're going to truly change our society, and it is high time we did that. And thank God for the courage of many women who have raised this issue and are forcing men to deal with it appropriately.
I think it needs to be said that so many of the candidates who have chosen women to be running mates, as a measure of the of an inner equality, of co-equality. And that speaks well to the moment that we're in. But we really have to go beyond that. My running mate, CAIR-Columbus, by the way, I consult with her on every decision related to the campaign, and will do so as governor of the state of Ohio. Whatever office I've held, the office has always been not just equal in the approach towards making sure that we have a balance of men and women on staff, but also equal pay. We have to make sure that wages and working conditions and all those laws are going to help women feel truly equal. And if we're talking about a culture where people want to direct the choices that women make, and let's face it, we still have the vestiges of a patriarchal society. We have to understand the psychology of that and how it puts women at a disadvantage immediately, even unconsciously. And when we have a governor who's aware of that, and when we say, if you want to support women, have child care, universal health care, pre-kindergarten, a living wage. These are things that show that we really recognize that women have some equality in this state. And I intend to lead the way in each and every area of that. Thank you.
I agree with what Rich said right off the bat. It's about men taking a step forward and leading the way with other men on this, and not just in everyday life, but in the political arena. I've stood up every single time the General Assembly, the Republicans of the General Assembly have put forward a bill to limit women's reproductive rights. I've been there. When it's equal work for equal pay, I've been there. When it's tax credits for child care, I've been there. I've been there because I believe in this stuff. I've been there because I talk to women's groups across the state, and they're saying, we just need people that are going to stand up for us, male or female. And so I've always been there. Now, something that I think we need to work on as governor, I've talked to a lot of women business owners that have said, the programs that we have set forth on paper sound great, but we need to make a lot of improvement when it comes to incentivizing young women starting companies, because it's not fair. And how are we going to tell our young women in the state that we are a place that it's fair for if it's not, and in fact it isn't in the situation that we're living today? So we need to make some changes on that front. I think that it's really important that we talk about things that we can move on together. I think that's why we all picked female running mates, and I think that that is a great example of where we need to go and where we need to start. Now, I will say that harassment in the workplace is being brushed under the rug many times because the same person that you have to report this to is often somebody that knows the person that is the perpetrator, and they don't do anything about it. And so you need to have HR groups that are separate and apart from that workplace so that there's no bias there. And that's the way that you can start actually moving the needle in the workplace. And as governor, that's something that I would implement.
Thank you. So now we will give each candidate 2 minutes to make their closing remarks, and we will start the opposite way that we started with the introductory remarks, and let Mr. O'Neill go first.
I thank you. I thank you for being here, because why this is important today, everybody in this room has demonstrated an interest in the quality of their government. So thank you for your time. Thank you for CAIR for putting on this great program and this great facility. But what we're here to talk about really is who is best suited to take on the executive role for the state of Ohio. We're talking about 11 million people are looking for leadership. And I don't have a long spiel for you on that. I would just suggest to you that you look at credentials and you look at approach to activities. The reason I had Joe give everybody a brochure today, because I'm immensely proud of the fact that I am the only candidate for governor in Ohio who has a specific 8-point program of how we're going to lead the state. It's not just marijuana, it's not just solar, it's high-speed rail, It is, for example, on a personal note, let me just tell you something. When I went to Ohio University in 1965, a working class family, ours, could put 3 kids through a state university at the same time. It cost $1,000. Today it costs $25,000. Kids are getting out of college $100,000 in debt, and they're not buying anything in the economy. So I mean, I'm just saying, you know, there's a lot of more issues we'll talk about later. But what I want to leave you with today, I'm Bill O'Neill. I have a Juris Doctor and I have a registered nurse's license. I chose as my running mate Chantel Lewis, who has taught in the Cleveland schools, and it doesn't get tougher than that. She's been a school board member. She has 2 master's degrees. She's on her way to her PhD, and she has a superintendent's license in Ohio. I defy you to find anybody more qualified to talk about education, which obviously we need to talk about. But I've got the O'Neill Lewis team for your review. And what I want to stress for you, because I feel very strongly about this, we have laid out our program for you to see early. I welcome your review. My name is Bill O'Neill. I want to be your governor.
By the way, I wasn't the one passing out the pamphlets.
Oh, wrong Joe.
Let's get another one. No, there's Joe. No, I appreciate that. So, here's what I want to talk about a little bit. You know, we have 4 good choices on this stage, and there's some other good choices that aren't here today. You know, everybody on this stage has done things in their life that they're going to highlight as the reason why they should be governor. But it's my opinion that we need a new generation of leadership. You know, I'm 38 years old. I've been in the Senate for 9 years. I've worked every single day on the issues and the questions that have been asked. As a workers' comp lawyer at home, I've worked to fight for the people that needed fought for. That was my job. When people have a problem, I diagnose the problem, and then I try to fix it. In the Senate, I would look at the problems in the Mahoning Valley, go down to the State House, and try to make it better for the people that I represent. And so I put forward a real plan. As soon as I started running for governor almost a year and a half ago, we put forward a website, joeforjobs.com, that explains how we get there. We talk about rebuilding our state. We talk about cleaning up the lake and cleaning up the river, cleaning up industrial brownfields, dealing with blight, making sure that everybody has access to broadband expansion so that they have the internet so they can do their homework or apply for a job. We make sure that we're getting rid of for-profit charter schools that are ripping off people across the state and putting that money where it should be, into public education so that we can give every kid an opportunity. We talk about universal pre-K so that kids that don't have, aren't from the best areas or don't have the most responsible parents or don't have all of the things that some of us had will have the same opportunities because that stuff works. You talk about affordable quality access to health care. You talk about investing in our future by giving young people the opportunity to stay here, but they won't stay here unless we incentivize job creators to come into Ohio, and then we train our workforce with the skills necessary in order to fill those jobs. Our students have way too much student debt when they graduate. I've put forward a bill that says, look, if you graduate from a school and you buy a house in the state of Ohio within 5 years of graduation, we will forgive that debt. That way you're incentivizing people. You're incentivizing people at the same time you're cleaning up your state, that you're retraining your workforce and giving people opportunity to stay in Ohio. And as governor, we would implement all of those things. Thank you for the opportunity, and I would ask for your vote.
Salam alaikum. Peace be to this community and to the people of the state of Ohio. And one of my responsibilities as governor is to create a more peaceful state with more peaceful communities, to have an organized approach to dealing with violence in our state. Domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, violence in the school, gang violence, gun violence, racial violence, violence against gays, police community conflict. We can have a more peaceful state. We can also have a more healthy state. I will bring the same intuitive, and intelligent approach I brought to Congress in drafting a universal health care bill to this state so that we can have a plan for Ohio where every Ohioan will be able to have access and affordability to a universal standard of care. I intend to lead the way to a fully employed state where we can rebuild our infrastructure, create jobs to make it possible for people to make a decent wage and a living wage. To start with $12.50 as a goal to $15 an hour so that people can support their families. I stand for well-educated communities. Yes, we need to stop the ripoff that these charter schools are engaging in, and one way to stop it is to start prosecuting the people who've stolen from the taxpayer. We need to protect public educational funding, but we also need to make it possible to use the resources of the state to enable every young person to be able to go to a public college or university for at least 2 years, tuition free. The money is there. We have to be dedicated to our young people in order to make that happen. We have to protect the environment. I told you moments ago that I'm ready to be the one who leads the way to end fracking, to end drilling, which is causing earthquakes. When I'm elected, there'll be a political earthquake in the state capitol because I intend to drive the corruption out of that state capitol and make it possible for we the people to finally create and claim a government we can call our own. It's called Kucinich Samples, #power to we the people. And when you elect me as governor, you will finally find what it's like to have a government you can call your own. Thank you.
Thank you again for being so patient this afternoon. You're here because you care about the future of this state, and as you see, each of us does as well. And you can see that we agree on many issues. Betty Sutton and I are running for governor and lieutenant governor as a team because we are going to focus on the things that we have understood and seen are on the minds of Ohioans more than any other, which are kitchen table issues, access to affordable health care, getting the education and kind of training that they and their children need to secure their futures, having access to the good jobs that pay a sustainable wage that you can raise a family on. Those are the key issues in this race, and those key issues we'll focus on. The contrast with the Republicans will be distinct and sharp. They aren't even for the Medicaid expansion, let alone access to affordable health care for all. They have been pushing and pushing for charter schools to the tune of millions of dollars of campaign contributions, despite the fact that the for-profit charter schools like ECOT have failed our students and thrown them back on the public schools with no provision in the middle of a school year, with $50 to $60 million missing, and hundreds of millions of dollars paid out over the past several years. On jobs and economic development, we've had trickle-down economics from this legislature for years and years of tax cuts that go to those who need and deserve the money the least and do not spread out economic opportunity for all. We will make a change in those policies, and we stand for something different. We also have a track record on these issues. I was appointed by President Obama to be America's consumer watchdog. We put $12 billion back in the pockets of Americans who had that money taken from them. Betty Sutton was appointed by President Obama to head economic development on the Great Lakes and Lake Erie, and she did a terrific job of that. None of the things we talked about today will matter unless candidates can win in May and win again in November. This is the ticket that can win next fall. We're already running even with Mike DeWine. He's been in this race for 8 years. I've been in this race for a month and a half. I look forward to being your candidate. I look forward to being your governor, and we will make change at the State House with Cordray Sutton. Thank you.
So that concludes the program. I would like to extend our sincere thanks and appreciation to all the candidates who attended today. We do have this room until 4, so you will have some time to come and talk with them. And we also would like to remind you of some important dates. The primary election is May 8th. Voter registration deadline for that is April 9th. Special election for the 12th congressional seat, August 7th. Voter registration deadline for that, July 9th. General Election Day, November 6th, and deadline to register October 9th. I would also like to quickly thank our Public Affairs Coordinator, Asjad Hamid, who's over here. He organized this event today, so thank you. And thank you all for coming. Please make sure that you look out for announcements for our other candidate forums that we'll be holding in the upcoming weeks and months. Thank you.